Hello and welcome to another Bodgit and Leggit video. Now today we are going to be installing Brian's race dash, and that's the one for everyone playing along at home. So we have the actual race dash here, we have the communication box, we have the actual lead that goes between the two, a few sensors. So this is an oil pressure sensor, we have an exhaust temperature sensor, we have oil and water temperature sensors, and a few wires and a few all sorts. So that's the dash, that's what we're going to be installing. So the first thing we're going to do is just actually get it in the car. Once we get it in the car, we'll go through all the wiring and stuff. But Brian did also notice that it has extendable bosses out the back, which is really nice. And they're actually, they've got metal inside. They're not running into plastic. They've actually got metal studs in, which is really good. And there we go. So that's what we're going to install today. Sorted. Right, one thing we did notice is they do give you the nuts and the bolts to actually mount these, which is great. So we was just figuring out how to actually mount this. The bolts go straight through this, so you mount this square plate first, or this hexagon plate first, then you put the bolts through. But look at the problem. So that's the bolt through. They are not long enough. So if you are doing this job, you're going to need to buy some longer screws before you start. And here we see Brian in his natural habitat. It's one of them things that has never been filmed before on camera. We have to be very quiet so we don't spook him. Because if we spook him, he will not come back. Tell him what you're doing, Brian. And how happy you are looking for bolts because they didn't supply them.
Yeah, looking for tiny boards.
They supplied every single bolt we need for the race dash, for the bracket, apart from what actually ties the bracket to the car.
You have tiny nuts.
How do you know? How do you know?
Linda told me.
Oh, okay. I don't really have tiny nuts, it's just my dick's that big, it looks tiny compared to yours. Do you know what I mean? The nuts look small.
Do you want to do a side-by-side comparison?
Whip it out then.
I know I'm alright.
That. It's just in place, obviously not wide up or anything, but it's in. So that's what it's going to look like. And this is what his dash is now looking like. We're going to make all special boxes and everything to enclose all that. But as you can see, that's what it looks like. Lovely. Right, we have the race dash installed. There we go. You can see what it looks like from the driver's perspective.
Take two, action. Oh, sorry. So, did I interrupt? Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm such a sorry.
He is a dick. I had to, hold on. I had to do take two anyway because I quickly showed the car and I'm like, I haven't actually announced it yet, so. So, this is what it looks like from the driver's perspective, and this is the actual race dash, Simtech D0908. Now, I believe they do loads of different ones, higher models than this and lower models than this, so it'd be interesting to see them, but this is the one we've got at the minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly power it up for you, just so you can get an idea of what it looks like powered up. Sorted. Using my battery booster pack for a portable power supply, but if I just switch it on, look at that. Now obviously nothing at the minute is actually you know, wired in, so we're gonna have to, there's loads of different things you can do, you know, 0 to 100 and you know, all this sort of stuff. There's a lot you can do. We can see the air fuel ratio there, so the wideband sensor, we've got boost pressure gauge if you've got a turbo, we've got oil temperature, water temperature, battery voltage, oil pressure, you know, the revs here, and then you can actually go through some of the menu here because we've got exhaust temperature sensor. We'll have to put it all up, but there's just loads, you know, for the price of this thing, it is quite unbelievable. Oh, there's the exhaust temperature, you can see it, but what you can actually do is once we've got it all wired in, we can actually get it in here properly, and actually, you know, you can put, so you can have the revs here, or you can have the oil temperature coming up here, the RPM, you can have anything you want, as well as having it all up there. So that's the race dash. Oh, it's all in there, you can't see it. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to wire it in. It all works through this box here essentially. So the actual dash part connects to the box. I've just powered up this box, and each one of these then is a different sensor. So one might be a wideband sensor, an oil pressure, oil temperature, water pressure, or water temperature, exhaust, and stuff like that. So it's going to be very simple, and I'm going to go through as much wiring as I possibly can without making it too boring. I'm going to wire a few sensors in, and then I'll just kind of go through one, because once you wired one sensor in, it's pretty much the same. And yeah, that's it, sorted. Right, and as always, I can't just start wiring this in, because we haven't got our ignition switch, and this is worked off our ignition switch. So I need to wire the ignition switch in first, but to wire the ignition switch in first, I need to wire the ECU into the ignition, and I also need to wire the alternator into the ignition. So I'm going to do all that. I'm not going to show you that, but we've got two powers already going into the ECU. Then we need a switch power, which is going to be our ignition. Then we need a switch power for our alternator, and we also need a switch power for our dash. So in other words, when I turn the dead man on, the ECU is off, the race dash is off, the alternator is off until I flick this on. Then our ECU will turn on, our race dash will turn on, and our alternator will be ready. And then we press this button and we start the engine. So once I've done all that, I'll show you everything switching on, and yeah, good to go. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the sensor wires for the race dash. But again, this is the problem with wiring now. This is just boring, chasing wires everywhere, and it won't really make an interesting video. But we're getting there, people, we're getting there. Right, so like I said, I'm going to show you bits of this, but it's very difficult to show you all, because essentially it's just feeding a couple of wires through, plugging in a connection into the actual box, and then wiring them two connections together. So it is fairly straightforward, but the instructions, on the other hand, can be a little bit misleading. Obviously, they've changed a few sensors in the past, because these are the sensors they're telling you for the oil and water pressure, where the actual sensors they give you are these ones, which is not a problem, but you know, if someone's not really knowing what they're doing, they might get a bit freaked out when they start seeing a different kind of sensor, because you know, it's not exactly the same as what's on the box. It tells you what to do here, but some of them is a bit, you know, if you're used to it, it's okay. But especially like the power one here, when you look at the back, it's slightly different to what it was telling you to do on the front. And when you look at the oil pressure, it says oil pressure, where that's oil temperature sensor. The oil pressure is it's a 3-wide sensor, not a 2-wide sensor. So some people might get kind of confused once they see stuff like this, but it is straightforward. We've got the ETC sensor here, which is the exhaust temperature sensor. Lucky enough, that was just long enough, and it's come with all its own connections. But again, what we have to do is we have to kind of wire it into this car first, and then figure out what we're going to do with the wires, how we're going to tidy them up, and go from there. So it's going to be messy at first, and then once we get everything plumbed in, we know everything's working, we can worry about, you know, the actual final fitment of it then. Because what I'm doing, as you can see at the minute, I'm just kind of screwing the wires together just by hand and making sure everything's working, making sure everything's fine, checking all my connections, because I've had a few problems with my connections. So checking all my connections, making sure every time I do a crimp or a solder or whatever, I check it to make sure it's okay, because if you just think they're okay and you carry on, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So yeah, the wiring diagram it's not great, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. So they could kind of improve that a little bit, but again, if you're used to it, you know, if you're used to kind of wiring, it's not really a big deal. But if you're doing this because you kind of, you know, bought this, you could think it's cool and you haven't got a clue, you're gonna not so much struggle, but it's going to take you a bit longer. So I'm just going to get this temperature sensor in for the oil pressure, for the oil, sorry, and then we're going to see what it looks like on the dash. Sorted. Right, so as you can see, this is our exhaust temperature pressure. Now, granted, it is best to have it in the collector pipe down below, but you know, we don't have a lot of connections in the exhaust. This one happened to be really close to us, and it happened to have a T-in connection, so we just drilled it and tapped it, and it's perfect. And it's going to give you a rough idea of kind of what's going on. You know, we had the sensor there, so we said we'd use it. We never really thought about an exhaust temperature sensor, but it's there, so we might as well use it, but not in the best place. So let's see what it looks like on the dash once we've kind of got that in. So what I've done is I've wired it all in. You can set it to with the yellow wire, which is down there. So when you turn on your headlights, the dash dims like a proper car dash dims. But we haven't done that in this particular case. I think we're going to put up a separate switch for that. But what happens is we turn on our dead man, and then we turn on ignition. And once we turn on ignition, our ECU and dash should come on, which it does. You can see the ECU lights on. And as you can see, we've got an exhaust temperature of 15 degrees. Yeah, the battery's a bit low, but don't worry about that. I'm using a battery pack. But what I like about it is you can see we've got oil temperature and water temperature. Now that says -20. That's because we haven't connected it. So that's like a default setting. So if you see that on your car, unless you live in a place where it is -20, of course, but in Ireland, it's never going to really be that, maybe the odd time, you get an idea of, you know, you've got an issue with the sensor or the wiring, because that is the standard default. Cars do the same thing as well, but normally they go to -40 when they do that. And I had a video the other day where it did that and it switched the fan on, because again, it's a fail-safe. So when you see that on your dash, at least you know you have an issue and you can actually, you know, rectify it, which is nice. There's lots of things we can go through on the dash. We haven't even set this up yet, but you got the time. You got like a race, you know, 0 to 100. There's, again, when we set this up, you can put the temperature sensor on the bottom. You can put the water temperature, the oil temperature, the oil pressure. You can do a lot of different stuff on the bottom to have it and kind of see what you're doing. So there we are. We're getting there. I'm just going to plumb in now the water. The oil temperature. So if you look at the minute, it says -20. Once I connect them wires together, it's going to read, well, whatever it is. We'll wait and see what it is. Sorted. Right, so let's see. We turn our dead man on. We're going to turn our ignition on. And what's our oil temperature? Boom, there we go. 11 is our oil temperature. Our inside of our exhaust is a bit hotter. And yeah, boom. So what we're going to do next, maybe water temperature. Right, what we've done is the actual boost gauge on the dash, you can actually use it also for a vacuum gauge. So lucky enough, they gave you all the actual things you need, but we did have to buy 2 more of these T-piece connections, but we already had them anyway. And what we've done is we've actually made it in such a way where we can put it on the throttle bodies. So each throttle body, you can just see here, has its own separate vacuum, so we can actually get a true reading from all 4 intakes. And that's how we're doing it. Just made our own nice little lead that's going to attach to this, which then will attach to the racing dash. Sorted. Right, Brian's just going to suck on it. Are you doing it? Are you doing it?
Yeah, I'm whopping it out.
You doing what with who?
I said I was sucking it.
Why are you sucking on it?
Is it boost? Is it a boost?
Are you used to sucking on things?
Oh, you prick, Leon. Tell me if there's boost, will you?
Oh, you're boosted now. 1.8. Hopefully we can change that in the settings to maybe something. You're up to 2 bar there. Oh, Brian, some guy would love you.
Hold on, I see if I can get 2 bar.
Oh, 3.5.
I disconnect myself to the engine.
You can suck a golf ball through a hose pipe.
No, that's boost now. Let's see how much vacuum I can give a. No, he's okay.
What?
He's okay.
-13. Because you're doing it the opposite way. We'll have to, hopefully we can change that in the settings, I don't know. But anyway, it's working.
How do you mean? But how it'll change.
Right, so as you can see, everything is still a mess. There's wires hanging out everywhere, but like I keep saying, this is just like to make sure everything works, to make sure we've got all the right components, parts and everything together. But let's just turn on the race dash again and let's see what we've got. So boom, look, we've got air fuel, got the MTLXL, we've got the boost pressure, we've got the oil temperature, we've got the exhaust temperature, we've got battery voltage, and we've got water temperature. So the only thing we're missing now is oil pressure. Now I need to turn the ECU on to make sure the ECU can see the oil pressure and the water temperature, because the ECU also has to control the fan, and it also has to control, there's a cutoff in the ECU, so if the oil pressure gets too low, you can actually cut the engine off to save it from, you know, blowing up. But we're able to test the oil pressure with the AcroSump. This car isn't started yet. We need to get a base map for it, so we're in no position to start it. But we'll be able to check it with the AcroSump once we actually get that plumbed in. It's going to be sorted. So there we go. It is nice and easy to wire in. The wiring diagrams are a little bit, yeah, they could be better, but it's still kind of easy. It's not difficult, and it's going to be really interesting to see how these perform. And I think they do other models. It'd be interesting to see them as well. But yeah, I think this is kind of their. It's not the cheapest one, but it's not the most expensive one. This one comes with all the sensors. If you get ones that don't come with all the sensors, they're a lot cheaper. But this one comes with sensors. That's what makes it a little bit more expensive. But I believe they have other ones. But for the price of these, you really can't complain. It's like everything. For the price, you cannot complain. So once I get it all wired up in this one, I'll show you it working in another car, and you can actually kind of see it working, because obviously I can't put the RPMs or anything on this one yet because the engine isn't running. Sorted. Right, I am on the last sensor for the race dash, but I'm still got to, you know, work out the fuel pump, the fan, so the actual ECU will turn on the fuel pumps and turn it off when it's primed, and when the trigger wheel stops, so if you crash it doesn't keep pumping out fuel. So I've still got to figure out all that, but this is the last sensor for the race dash, the oil pressure switch. And we have the oil pressure switch here that we did in our wiring loom, because we've also got a separate one for the ECU, so the ECU can turn off the engine if the oil pressure gets too low or too high. And this plug allows the race dash to see it. So I've just put the pins on it, and I'm gonna put it into our connection here, and then we're gonna be good to go. Sorted. Right, I've got the last sensor plugged into the race dash. You can see it there, oil pressure. And again, all these wires will become a lot tidier. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna get Brian to crank it. I'm gonna turn on the dead man. I'm going to turn on the ignition, and we're going to see the dash light up. The only thing I haven't done yet is RPM and speed. So the RPM won't go up, and obviously we're not moving anywhere. But as you can see, we've got fuel, we've got boost, we've got oil pressure, we've got water temperature, we've got batteries a bit low, we've got oil, so water temperature, oil temperature, and exhaust temperature. So I'm going to get Brian to crank it, and what we're looking for is our oil pressure. Boom, look at that, it goes up. There we go. And our air fuel is moving around too. Sorted. Boom, stop, 26 psi. But that was obviously just cranking the fueling off. Everything's off, so it was never going to start. But there we go, everything's working. This race dash looks awesome. It is different to mine, unfortunately. Mine doesn't have all this. Mine's like, must be the cheaper model. I would love to see the bigger model. And yeah, but that is the race dash working. Sorted.
Be wrong, but it looks like Brian doesn't realise what a lift is for. The vehicle's on the lift, but yet he's still kneeling down. Brian.
I'm not 10 feet tall, by the way. When it's up, I can't see what I need to see. When it's down, I want to see what I want to see, but I have to kneel down. All right?
All right. Thanks for the explanation.
If you remember from the first video to this video, now again, I still haven't tidied all them wires up because that box belongs underneath the dash and you won't see any of that. But you get the idea of just how tidy it's going to be. I'm really impressed with it. I would like to see different colours and, you know, different features and stuff on it. But for the price of it, you really can't complain. The 8, what's this? This is the 908. Mine's the 906, I believe, or the 905. This one is better. I prefer the layout on this one compared to my one, but there you go. Look at the difference. Now this has taken a long time. People don't realise how long wiring takes, but this has taken us a good few days to do this, and there's still a lot more work in it. And like I said, this will be a lot better than that. But we're going to get Brian's reaction now for the first time in a long time. He's going to be able to turn all the switches on and crank the engine over. We've no base map in it yet. I might do a video on how to do a base map. I don't know yet. It just depends on our time and stuff, because that can be involved, and I don't know how I'm going to film that to make it kind of good, but I'll see. But once we get the base map in, we'll then go and get it tuned on a rolling road, and we'll film that as well. So we're getting there, people. We're getting there. Right, like I explained, this isn't going to start, but Brian hasn't actually seen it like this. He's seen it with wires kind of everywhere. I haven't had all the buttons ready and working, so this is going to be honestly Brian's first reaction to this. So I'm going to get him to come in now, and we're going to actually see his reaction. He's been...
Oh man, it's finally beginning to look like a race car.
Right, so turn your ignition on. Dead man's up here.
Dead man, yeah.
So all this is now, I haven't even done this myself, not properly through everything. So ignition.
Oh, it's upside down.
Well, I can flick the switch, that's not a
All right, okay. You know, I just
God,
ignore.
complaining already, complaining for fuck's sake.
Not even complaining.
Jesus.
Anyway, I'm used to.
I'll turn the switch the other way around.
It's mad. Look, air fuel ratio. It's got vacuum, oil pressure, water temp, voltage, oil temp. Man, we got everything working.
Right,
EGT
so
temp.
press the start button. It's not going to start, but...
Oh yeah.
Hey! Okay, we can stop now. There we go. So we need to get the base map in, turn the fuel pumps and stuff on, and this should be ticking over. But what do you think, Mr. Brian? Apart from you moaning about the switch.
No, I'm just getting used to it. And I know I'm super happy about it. I just can't wait to get it out on the track, because it's been years, literally years. There's so much testing to be done.
And there's a lot of work that's in this. It doesn't look much, but believe me,
yeah,
there's a lot of work.
There's a lot of work. There's a lot of work, yeah. I'm chuffed now.
Good stuff. So there we go. Sorted. Right, so that really is it. So let me just turn on the ignition so we can get a bit better angle of that. So the only thing that I have got to do is I've got to get the RPM working and the actual speedo working, or this talking to them. I've also got, and that's from the ECU, I've also got to tell the ECU to turn the pump off when it primes, because if you crash you don't want the pump constantly on. And I've also got to tell the ECU when to turn the fan off. So I'm going to have to, I still have to do an awful lot of wiring and tell the ECU when to turn on fans, when to turn on pumps, and stuff like that. So there's still a lot to do, which I'm going to be doing in another video. I'll try and film as much of it as I can, but it is going to be difficult because what the hell was that? Did you hear that? What the hell was that? Anyway, so there's still a lot of work to do, but it's going to be kind of basically on the computer, and hopefully a lot of the wiring is done to this auxiliary. So I can tell the ECU, right, on pin 1 for example, give me an RPM signal, and then I'll wire that to this, and on pin 2 give me a mile-an-hour signal, you know, blah blah blah. On pin 3 give me the pump control, pin 5 give me the fan control. So I've got to go through all that and figure out what I can make to work where, essentially, and then I'll film as much of that as I can, and then we'll get the base map on it, and then we'll get this thing ticking over, and then we'll get it tuned. Sorted. The hell are you doing?
Restoring its orgasmic factor. You know,
And-
the cable tie.
Breaking my screwdrivers in the process.
No, that's the screwdriver.
Brian's actually going to be working on his car. Let's see what he's doing. Right, so Brian, just explain to me what you're doing here. Why are you putting that cable tie back?
Because you had it there the first time.
The first time, so why has it been removed?
Because the sensor was leaking, and the
Why was the sensor leaking?
because It's made from Chinesium.
No. Why was the sensor leaking?
Because the oil filter was loose.
Again, why was the sensor leaking?
Because the oil filter was loose and the sensor was loose.
No.
I don't know. I don't.
Anyway.
I don't think you can prompt me anymore.
He's just not going to tell the truth. Doesn't matter. What we've done is, if he just moves his hand a second, you'll see that's the sensor there. So, yeah, he's got these really special cable ties, which are awesome, which clip into a hole, and then you can just actually put the cable tie around them. So there we go. That's what he's doing.